Hello and welcome. Today, let's talk chapter 1. We'll go through the body and we'll do a little orientation in relation to the body. Here, we'll start off by talking about the definition of physiology. Now, when we talk about the definition of physiology, I would like you to know physiology studies the function of the body. It studies how living organisms are going to function. Basically, how the body parts work and carry out their life sustaining activities. Physiology reveals the body's dynamic and animated workings. Physiology focuses on events at the cellular or molecular level because the body's abilities depend on those of individual cells, and cells' abilities ultimately depend on the chemical reactions that go on within them. Now, even when we study organisms all the way down to individual molecules, our intentions is to understand and apply it to the whole body. During this class, when we refer to body structures or physiological values, for example, blood pressure, body temperature, heart rate, we're going to assume we are talking about a healthy, young 22-year-old male weighing about 155 pounds, or a healthy, young 22-year-old female weighing about 125 pounds. This will be our reference male and female we could think of. I'd like you to know when we talk in physiology, just like in anatomy, physiology is going to have many subdivisions, and most of them are going to look at the operation of specific organ systems. For example, if we're talking renal physiology, now renal physiology is going to study how the kidneys function and how urine is produced. When we talk neurophysiology, it studies how the nervous system works. Cardiovascular physiology, it studies the operation of the heart, blood, and blood vessels. In order to study physiology, you have to be able to focus at many levels, study basic physical principles, and also be able to study basic chemical principles. We'll apply all of them here, and we should have one successful semester of understanding and studying physiology. Next, let's move on to our survival needs. The ultimate goal of our body's systems is to maintain life. Life is so fragile that it also requires several factors. So life is so fragile that it also requires several factors. And these factors are said to be our survival needs. And these survival needs include, number one, nutrients, food, right, which is made up of glucose, proteins, lipids, sodium, potassium, right, and so forth. Second, you have oxygen. Third, then we can see we have water. Also, appropriate body temperature and appropriate atmospheric pressure and an appropriate atmospheric pressure. All our survival needs. Now, I want you to know just the presence of these factors isn't enough either. They have to be present in appropriate amounts. Too much and too little are equally harmful. For example, Oxygen is essential. Okay, but after prolonged hours or days of exposure, excessive amounts of oxygen is going to be toxic to our body's cells. Food that we eat, food that we eat has to be of high quality and also in proper amounts. Otherwise, nutritional diseases such as obesity and or starvation can occur. Now, all of these needs listed are the most crucial you could think of, because we'll see the body's needs are very vast. We can live without gravity, but then the quality of life suffers. Right? Astronauts have to actually undergo training to be able to survive in those environments. And now we understand the dangers or the diseases that these low gravity, no gravity areas can cause. Nutrients. Now, when we talk nutrients, we'll see nutrients are going to be taken in via our diet, and they contain chemical substances that are going to be used by our bodies for energy and also for cell building. Most plant-derived foods are rich in carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals, whereas most animal foods are richer in proteins and fats. Now we talk carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the major energy fuel for our body's cells. Right? Proteins and fats, they're vital for building cell structure. Fats, they also provide a reserve of energy-rich fuel. Certain minerals and vitamins are required for the chemical reactions that take place or go on in cells, and they are required for oxygen transport in blood. Calcium is a mineral, and it's going to help our bones to become hard, and it's also required for blood clotting. When we talk oxygen, our next survival need, is so important that all the other nutrients in the world are useless unless oxygen is available. Humans can only survive for a few minutes without oxygen, and that's because the chemical reactions that release energy from our foods, which we call oxidative reactions, they require energy. About 20 to 21% of the air that we breathe is oxygen. The rest will include other gases such as nitrogen, argon, carbon dioxide, and even methane. The respiratory and cardiovascular systems work collectively to make oxygen available to the blood and our body's cells. Next, then we have water is the most abundant chemical in the body. It accounts for about 60%, average about 60% of our body weight. And you can see that makes it the most abundant chemical in the body, the most abundant chemical substance in the body. Total body water is about 42 liters. Water provides the watery environment that's necessary for chemical reactions and the fluid base for body secretions and excretions. Water is found in our body divided into two main compartments. Number one, you have your extracellular fluid, your ECF. And number two, you have your ICF, intracellular fluid. So we have our extracellular fluid and then our intracellular fluid. Now this extracellular fluid is going to get, you'll see, further subdivided into then what we call your interstitial fluid and also plasma. Horrible pen. Should be a little bit. And plasma. So when we talk extracellular fluid is made up of your plasma which is coming from blood, and also your interstitial fluid. That's the fluid that's going to be found in between your cells. Next in here, water, I want you to know, is going to be obtained through ingested food and liquids. It's obtained through ingested foods and liquids. Water is going to be removed or lost from the body through evaporation. Through evaporation from the lungs and the skin, also in our body excretions. So water is removed or lost from the body through evaporation, which happens from the lungs and the skin, and then also in body excretions. Next then is a normal body temperature. A normal body temperature is important and must be maintained in order for the chemical reactions to continue at a life-sustaining rate. And if the body temperature drops below 37 degrees Celsius, it causes our metabolic reactions to slow down and eventually stop. Now, when body temperature is too high, chemical reactions occur at a crazy pace, and the body's proteins can lose their characteristic shape and they stop functioning. In either case, death results. The activity of the muscular system generates most of our body's heat. Last then is appropriate atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure is the force that air is going to exert on our body's surface. Breathing and gas exchange in the lungs all depends on an appropriate atmospheric pressure. At high altitudes, atmospheric pressure is lower, and this causes the air to be thinner, and gas exchange is insufficient to support cellular metabolism. Let's talk about homeostasis. Homeostasis. Now, when we talk homeostasis, homeostasis literally, it means unchanging. It means unchanging. It's going to be defined as a state of reasonably stable balance of our physiological variables. It's a word used to describe the body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment while the outside world changes continuously. Now, in simpler terms, it indicates a dynamic state of equilibrium or balance. We consider the body to be in homeostasis when it's functioning smoothly and its needs are met. Now, to maintain homeostasis is not that easy. Virtually every organ system we'll see plays a role. Now, some examples are Adequate blood levels of your vital nutrients have to be continuously present. Heart activity and blood pressure have to be monitored and adjusted so that blood is propelled to all body tissues. And we'll see waste has to be removed and it cannot accumulate. And then the last example is body temperature has to be controlled. So this will take us to homeostatic control, and you'll see in order to maintain homeostasis, again, communication within the body is very important. And this communication is accomplished mainly by the nervous and endocrine systems, which we'll see will use neural, electrical impulses, or blood-borne hormones as information carriers. Now, all homeostatic control mechanisms are going to be processes that are going to involve at least three components that work together. And these three components will include, number one, we'll see a receptor. Second will be a control center. And then third will be the effector. And we'll go through each of those. So when we talk then, homeostatic control, again, it involves continuous monitoring and regulation, communication, function of the nervous and endocrine system, right? And then how we said via nerve impulses or hormones, chemical messengers. Okay, the components of the control mechanism then include, we can see all three components here. Now, when we talk receptor, the receptor is a type of sensor. It's a type of sensor, and it's going to be responsible for monitoring the environment, and it responds to changes that are called stimuli, and it responds to these changes that are called stimuli by sending information, or we refer to that information as input, by sending information then to the second component, which is the control center. Now, this information, it's going to flow, and it's going to flow along the afferent pathway from the receptor to the control center. Afferent, you can think of approaches the control center. Then when we talk control center, the control center, it analyzes, it integrates the input that it receives, and it determines an appropriate set point or response, or you can think of course of action to that input. Now, information or output then is going to flow, and it'll flow to the effectors via the efferent pathway. So it'll flow from the control center along the efferent pathway. Efferent, you can think of exits from the control center. Then when we talk the third component, the effector is third, and this third component provides the means for the control center's response to the stimulus. It provides the means for the control center's response, the output to the stimulus. Now, the results of the response then feed back to influence the effect of the stimulus, either reducing it. When that happens, we refer to that as the negative feedback, so that the whole control process is shut off, or the response is to enhance it, which then is a positive example of a positive feedback mechanism. Now, here in positive feedback mechanisms, we said enhancing it so that the whole process continues at even a faster rate. So you can see here, response is either going to reduce or enhance the stimulus. And if it reduces, we call it the negative feedback response, right? Or enhancing the stimulus, it's a positive feedback mechanism. Let's talk then, or here you can see everything basically illustrated in this image then. So if we are not in balance, homeostasis, let's say the homeostatic imbalance is encountered, so no more homeostatic balance, a homeostatic imbalance is encountered, that stimulus is going to produce a change, and that is going to be sent then from the receptor, because the receptor is responsible for detecting the change, to the control center we set along the afferent pathway. And this is input. This is information being sent to the control center. The control center then integrates that information, and then we said it dictates out a response, and that response is along the efferent pathway to the effector. And the effector is either muscle or glands, we'll see, is going to help correct it through either positive or negative feedback mechanisms. Let's talk negative feedback mechanisms. When we talk negative feedback mechanisms, I want you guys to know first, most homeostatic control mechanisms in our body function as negative feedback. So you can see most homeostatic control mechanisms in our body function as negative feedback. In these systems, the output from the body, the output shuts off. It shuts off the original effects of the stimulus, or we say it reduces its intensity. These mechanisms cause the variable to change in a direction opposite to that of the initial change, returning it to its ideal value. Thus, the name negative feedback. Now, an example, I'll give you a non-biological example, is a home heating system connected to a temperature sensing thermostat. Now the thermostat, it houses both the receptor, which is going to be the thermometer, and the control center. Now, if we set the thermostat at 68 degrees, the heating system, the effector, it gets triggered on when the temperature drops below that setting. And then as the air warms, the temperature rises, and when it reaches 68 or slightly higher, the thermostat triggers the heating system off. So our thermostat is located in our hypothalamus, and it works in the same way. Now, this was an example of how the nervous system maintains constancy. Another way is when the hand is jerked away from a painful stimulus. The endocrine system. The endocrine system is also important in maintaining homeostasis. And an example of hormonal control would be the control of blood sugar, glucose, by insulin. As glucose rises, receptors sense this change, and the pancreas, the control center, it secretes insulin. It secretes insulin into the blood. Insulin then causes the body's cells to absorb more glucose, removing it from the bloodstream. as glucose levels fall, the stimulus for insulin's release is going to end. There are hundreds of other variables that need to be regulated and are under negative feedback control, like heart rate, blood pressure, the rate and depth of breathing, and the blood levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and minerals, and so on. All negative feedback mechanisms have the same goal, and that is preventing sudden severe changes within the body. So here we can see one where body temperature changes. Body temperature changes, we have that imbalance take place. The receptor senses that, sends this information along that afferent pathway to the control center. The control center then sends its response down the efferent pathway to the effectors, to the sweat glands. Here the stimulus was heat, body temperature rising. So the response then is going to be to cool the body down. How does it happen? By activating the sweat glands. The sweat glands then are going to allow sweat to be released, and when air hits it, that's going to help cool down the body. And then the opposite, if body temperature rising, body temperature falls if we get too cold. Now here we're going to want to initiate the shivering mechanism, right? Contract muscles. So here you can see the receptors sense that change with body temperature falling, sending that information to the control center, sending that information then to the effectors. The effectors here then are our skeletal muscles, as we've described, allowing for shivering to occur, which then helps to increase body temperature, causing it to rise. Next, then we have our positive feedback mechanisms. When we talk positive feedback mechanisms, they are not homeostatic, meaning it's not used to promote the moment-to-moment well-being of the body. Here, the result or the response enhances the original stimulus so that the response is accelerated. Positive feedback mechanisms are sometimes called cascades, basically to fall, because they exhibit these amplifying or cascade type effects. They set off a series of events that may be self-perpetuating, and if once initiated, they are going to have an amplifying or waterfall type of an effect. Now, examples are the enhancement of labor contractions during childbirth and blood clotting. Let's talk first example, childbirth. We'll see oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hypothalamic hormone. It's going to be released from the neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary. And it's going to get released in large amounts when you have distension of the cervix and also of the uterus. What it does, it intensifies. First example is oxytocin. It's a hypothalamic hormone. It's going to be released by the neurohypophysis, the posterior pituitary. And it gets released in large amounts when you have distension of the cervix and uterus. Oxytocin, it intensifies labor contractions during birth. Oxytocin causes the contractions to become both more frequent and more powerful. The increased contractions are going to cause more oxytocin to be released, which causes more contractions to occur. So this will occur then over and over and over and over again. So again, contractions, oxytocin release. Oxytocin release causes contractions. Contractions cause oxytocin release. So you see you have an amplifying or a waterfall type of an effect, and this is going to happen until the baby is born. The birth ends the stimulus for oxytocin's release and shuts off that positive feedback mechanism. Second, then, is blood clotting. Blood clotting is a normal response to a break in the wall of a blood vessel. Once a vessel has been damaged, blood elements called platelets immediately begin to cling to the injured site and release chemicals that are going to attract more platelets. This rapidly growing pileup of platelets, it temporarily plugs the tear and initiates clotting. And here we could see that right in this figure. So here you've got that platelet plug being created. Now when we talk homeostatic imbalances are going to now take place when homeostasis is not achieved. Homeostasis is so important that most diseases can be regarded as a result of its disturbance, a condition we call homeostatic imbalance. As we age, our body's control systems become less efficient, and our internal environment becomes less and less stable. And these events then increase our risk for illness. Or if we have our negative feedback mechanisms being overwhelmed.